promise that we are not going to raise iPad children. Please.
As a Gen Z who majored in education for 1 semester and worked in childcare for about 8 or 9 years, and who has many younger relatives, I think I speak for many of us when I say that Gen Alpha, or the iPad kid generation, is so far an absolute terrifying nightmare to deal with. And I want to talk about this today. And I know people say this about every young generation, it's kind of like a rite of passage for aging, but it is an epidemic to the point where teachers who have taught their entire lives are just up and quitting their jobs now because they can't handle these kids anymore. And yes, of course, there are other issues like benefits and pay, but the main reason when polled for most teachers is the children's behavior of recent years. The main issues we're finding with Gen Alpha, which to be clear was born between 2010 and 2025, and most of their parents are either millennials or Gen Xers, is that they're having extreme social issues and they have like little to no mannerisms. The iPad kids are out of control! I'm not lying when I tell you, as someone who used to nanny for a lot of families, I have some crazy stories, but the families that were the easiest to manage were the families that extremely controlled screen time for their kids. I think a big issue is that these kids are using screens at a rate we've never historically seen before, and these parents are replacing like parenting and babysitters with iPads. Like even Gen Z didn't have this level of access to the internet quite. And we all know that all this screen time is bad for everyone in society, but we're directly seeing that in things like this generation as a whole is having reduced attention span and concentration. So that might be why like ADHD diagnoses seem to be going up and up. They spend less time socializing in person, and this one I've seen the most with the kids in my life is less development of creativity and imagination. The kids I've watched over the years have no interest in coloring and building, and they just want to sit on their iPads and watch Netflix and play apps and games. The worst families I ever had to nanny for were the families that allowed their kid like unregulated access to their iPads and whatnot because they just wanted to be on those 24/7, and it was a nightmare. These kids didn't want to go and play outside, they didn't do a lot of imagination play, and they never wanted to go and play with toys, they just wanted to sit and play on their apps. And I would watch them play on the apps just to see if it was really all that bad, but there was really like no creativity happening on those apps. And terrifyingly enough, if you tried to take this tech from these kids, they didn't know how to act. And I could always tell when a parent didn't have proper boundaries or anything, because if you try and take an iPad out of an iPad kid's hand, not only will they throw a tantrum so large, but they will start physically hitting you. And the first few times this happened whilst I was nannying families, I was amazed because like, who allows their kid to behave like this? Even as a child who would throw temper tantrums, like I knew that you would never put your hands on someone who at least wasn't immediate family. There were some kids that had no problem even straight up hitting me in my face. And I think a lot of the millennials that I work for really liked having me as a nanny because I would slowly try and like infiltrate my parenting style into their lives because I was around the family so much. Specifically, every day when one family came home from school, one was like 5 and the other was about 7, so they didn't really have homework ever. I would take all of the electronics and put it away, and tantrums would start. And I'd say, that's fine, let it all out, let it all happen, do what you need to do here. But if it was a nice day out, I'd be like, okay, let's go outside. We'd all go outside. I would close and lock the door behind us and tell them, go play. You have tons of outdoor toys that you literally never touch. Or if it was cold outside, usually these kids had entire playrooms that went completely untouched because of these iPads. And I'd say, go play with your toys in the playroom. You have hundreds of toys, go and play with them. You will find something to do, I promise. And in 3 or 4 hours, when your parents are home, you get all of your tech back because they don't care. And yes, usually I would allow like 20 or 30 minutes of TV time after school sometimes to allow them to wind down and relax, because everyone needs to relax after a long day at work. Other than that, iPad games and movie nights were things that had to be earned by doing little chores or just helping out around the house like every other family who was raised in the 90s and early 2000s would have done it. And if I was with the family long enough, I genuinely started to see improvements with the children to the point where the parents would see it too. And a few times in passing, I had parents be like, what are you doing? Like, they seem to just be behaving better. And I'm like, well, yeah, I'm raising your kids. Like, I'm teaching them about actions and consequences and how to handle their emotions properly. And listen, I'm all for handing a kid an iPad when you're out in public at lunch or whatever to coddle a public meltdown. Because you know what? We had these. This is what my mom would bring us to kind of babysit us when she's out in public, just trying to have a lunch with her friends. But this is not a 24/7 replacement for raising your child. So you know what? When I have kids, when Gen Z has kids, we're going on eBay, we're getting the 1998 LeapPad learning system. But I also think it's important to note that it's not the iPad's fault that kids are turning out this way. Historically, we've always blamed tech for issues in our children. At the end of the day, it is the parenting style and approach, or lack thereof, to blame, really. I'm not trying to mom shame or say this is easy, but we can do this. This has gotten out of hand.